Hello, John Tennison here. I'm going to read to you a short story that I wrote on August the 29th of 2018. It's titled From Texarkana to Marshall by Train. After sleeping in the Pines Hotel in the Swamp Poodle district of Texarkana last night, I have arrived at the Texas and Pacific Depot in Marshall, Texas, on the Texas and Pacific Steam Locomotive 400. The story of how I got to Marshall is one I will never forget. Before leaving the hotel to go to Union Station to depart for Marshall, I was preparing to put on my only set of clothes. But before my very eyes, my clothes suddenly got shrunk to tiny proportions by some mysterious, purplish, undulating wave that traveled suddenly through one wall of my room and then out through the opposite wall. I was barely able to stand clear of the wave hitting me. The shrinkage of my clothes was actually fortuitous, as I had lost my luggage in a craps game in Swamp Poodle the night before to a fellow named Black Diamond. Now I only needed a small container to hold my clothes. I sat there in my room at the Pines Hotel wondering what I might use to hold my clothes when I noticed a matchbox on the nightstand. The matchbox turned out to be the perfect size. When I told the hotel clerk what had happened, he said, "Oh yeah, that's Oya." The hotel clerk explained to me that Oya was a temporal spatial anomaly on the Arkansas-Texas state line in Texarkana. The clerk said that Oya was the name given to the anomaly long ago by indigenous people who lived in the area. When I arrived at Union Station, there was much commotion. No one seemed to be bothered by the fact that I was wearing no clothes. I learned from a man named Leadbelly that a seemingly train-related accident had resulted in the death of a child, the engineer, the fireman, and the conductor of the exact train, number 5, that I was going to take to Marshall. It is still not clear how the individuals died. Filled with dread, some Texarkanians were speculating that the accident might have been caused by Oya. According to Leadbelly, the engineer's head was found in a driver wheel of locomotive 400. Leadbelly said that the engineer's body was never found. Strangely, Leadbelly said that a decapitated body of what appeared to be a child no more than 2 years old was found close to locomotive 400. As a result of the accident, and likely from the fact that I was wearing no clothes, a Texas and Pacific official recruited me to serve as engineer, presumably to keep me out of sight from the other passengers. The Texas and Pacific official told me that because of Oya, space had become temporarily distorted to such a degree immediately before my departure to Marshall that the distance from Texarkana to Marshall had become less than the usual 69 miles. The official told me that because of the current but temporary spatial distortion caused by Oya, Louisiana had become just a mile from Texarkana, and the distance from Texarkana to Marshall had become similarly warped to the benefit of reducing my travel time. I expressed my amazement to the TMP official, but he assured me that the current spatial distortion was nothing compared to another instance in which Oya had spatially distorted the whole Texas side of Texarkana to such an extreme that it ended up down near New Orleans, while the Arkansas side of Texarkana ended up almost as far, just a few short miles away from the Texas side. It turns out that the Arkansas-Texas boundary is not an arbitrary political boundary at all, but rather is the most significant line of energy in the Oya anomaly. Occasionally, Oya causes the Arkansas and Texas sides of Texarkana to become more spatially distant from each other by only a few short miles, while at the same time displacing both the Arkansas and Texas sides of Texarkana many miles, usually in a southeasterly direction. At the time of the extreme event recalled by the TMP official, a French family who had invested in the Franco-Texan Land Company was visiting Texarkana. The family of 3 were posing on the state line for a souvenir painting. The mother and father were standing on the Arkansas side, while the mother was holding the hand of her 5-year-old son named Lafayette, who was standing on the Texas side. Without warning, Oya's spatial distortion wave undulated quickly down the state line, completely severing the mother's right hand while it still held the left hand of her son. Little Lafayette was quickly swept away with the whole Texas side of Texarkana while he screamed and still held his mother's severed right hand. The mother stood in a state of terrified shock, watching her son being swept away as blood gushed from the open end of her right arm. Fortunately for her, a Dr. Rooks was nearby and quickly intervened to apply a tourniquet to stop the bleeding. When the spatial distortion resolved and the Texas and Arkansas sides of Texarkana resumed their normal locations, Lafayette was nowhere to be found. He was discovered several days later down near New Orleans, wandering aimlessly while still gripping his mother's rotting right hand. Given these horrendous events described to me by the TMP official, I was hesitant to assume the role of engineer, but as you can see from the photograph of the inside of the cab of the locomotive, the controls to drive the steam locomotive are remarkably similar to a piano keyboard. So, being a boogie-woogie piano player, I easily adapted to the role of engineer. I controlled the speed of the driver wheels with my left hand on the lower half of the keyboard, while the steam whistle, bell, steam regulation, and various other noisy functions were controlled by my right hand on the upper half of the keyboard. A blind gentleman named Tom was recruited by the TMP official from the other passengers to serve as the fireman. I suspect Tom was recruited to be fireman because of his blindness and belief by the TMP official that Tom would not notice that I was naked. Tom helped make the trip more pleasant by beatboxing to the sound of the drivers. The locomotive cab provided ample shade as Tom beatboxed to the rhythm that the drivers made. Another fellow named Scott was recruited by the TMP official to serve as the conductor. During our trip from Texarkana to Marshall, Scott kept insisting that I was driving the train too fast. Because of a collision of two trains that he witnessed in Crush, Texas, Scott had apparently concluded that trains should never be driven fast, but I couldn't help myself. Ball in the jack is just too much fun. I was driving so fast that we almost went off the tracks on a blind curve near a lemon orchard in Jefferson. Before arriving in Marshall, the locomotive tender almost ran out of water, but fortunately I got her into Marshall just in time, where the proprietor of the Ginocchio Hotel prevented the boiler from exploding by filling the tender with something he called boogie-woogie beer. I decided to get off in Marshall and stay at the Ginocchio Hotel. Having spent my last dime in Swamp Poodle, I didn't have any money upon arriving in Marshall, but when the Ginocchio proprietor learned that I was an itinerant musician, he said he would let me pay for my room and board by performing a booger-rooger taking place at the Ginocchio Hotel on Sunday, September 2nd, 2018 at 2:30 p.m. The proprietor said that 3 other itinerant musicians named Raphael, Icy, and Benjamin would also be performing at the booger-rooger, so I will be in excellent company. I am happy to report that after arriving in Marshall, I have apparently escaped the spatial distortion effects of Oya, as my clothes snapped back to their original proportions and I can now wear them again. But the matchbox is now unusable.